Good evening, and welcome to tonight's forum on the timely topic of the Electoral College. I'm Judy Sternberg, President of the League of Women Voters of the Rochester metro area. First, a brief note. This event is being recorded, and a link to it will be sent to all attendees in a few days. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government and works to increase understanding of major public policy issues. We do not support or oppose any political parties or candidates and encourage tonight's viewers to visit vote411.org, where you can find listings of all the races on your ballot and all the candidates and candidate-provided information and responses. Membership in the League is open to all persons who are at least 16 years of age, and that means not just women and not just citizens. And those under 16 can join as associate members. Now I'd like to introduce Jane Amstey, President of the National Association of Jewish Women, Greater Rochester Section, and thank NCJW for their co-sponsorship of tonight's forum.
Thanks, Judy. Good evening, everyone. We're so excited to be partnering this evening and for this wonderful event to learn more about the Electoral College. Really excited that you could join us. I want to tell you a little bit about NCJW. National Council of Jewish Women is a grassroots organization of volunteers and advocates who turn progressive ideas into action. Inspired by Jewish women, NCJW strives for social justice by improving the quality of life for women, children, and families, and by safeguarding individual rights and freedoms. Our organization is open to all people, and if you're interested to find out more, you could please check us out on Facebook, on our NCJW Greater Rochester section, or on our website. One of the things we did want to let you know for this evening is that due to our nonpartisan 501c3 tax status, NCJW has not taken a position at this time for the future of the Electoral College. It is important to learn about how the Electoral College plays a role in electing our president, and we're really excited to co-sponsor this event this evening. Thank you.
Elaine, unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm Elaine Schmidt, current chair of the program committee. On behalf of the program committee, I would like to introduce you to Sarah Liebschutz, our presenter this evening. Sarah is a distinguished service professor emerita of the State University of New York, where she was a member of the political science faculty at SUNY College at Brockport for 27 years, including 6 of those as chairperson. Sarah has been a proud and active member of the League of Women Voters. Most recently, she has organized and moderated forums on the Affordable Care Act in 2013 and the Supreme Court in 2018. We're so glad to have you here this evening, Sarah.
Thank you very, very much, Elaine, for that nice introduction. And I want to say at the outset that I appreciate so much that the League of Women Voters and the National Council of Jewish Women are making possible the opportunity for us tonight to consider in some depth a uniquely American institution for electing the leader of our country. Now, I know you've all been bombarded by the media, every permutation, a combination of the media, almost every hour of every day about the pandemic, the various protests, the economy. And while your position on those hot button issues may determine how you personally select a candidate for president, I submit to you tonight that the Electoral College surpasses all of them in importance in determining the outcome of the 2020 election. Now, I'm going to see how well I can do in terms of technical prowess here. And so far, I think I'm all right. And what I want to do is to begin with my slides. So the question before the House, so to speak, is what do we do with the Electoral College? Do we keep it, do we reform it, or do we abolish it? It's not a matter of recent public interest. On the contrary, within a decade after the Constitution was ratified in 1788, the Electoral College became a source of discussion and discontent, and so it has continued for more than 200 years to the present day. So the question is, what should we think in 2020 about the Electoral College, this institution in our Constitution? So to get to these choices, I pose three questions, and here they are. Why do we have such a complicated system to elect our president? Number two, how well has the Electoral College reflected the popular vote? And number three, what are some proposals for changing the current system? Now, some speakers make you wait until the very end to give you the main points. Others make so many points by the time you get to the end, you've forgotten most of them. So I'm going to spare you both approaches and tell you right at the start what my key propositions are. And I see on each of these questions. So these are the takeaways. Federalism is the answer. Federalism is a very complicated system of governing, and the Electoral College is a construct of that system.
We're not seeing your slides.
Okay, we need to share the screen, I see, right? Is that the problem? Okay, so I guess I need to go back. Let me just go back to the beginning. No, I'm afraid I'm not there. All right. Okay, so let's close this off, end the show here. And there should, let me just turn this all the way off, get out of it, and then share. So now I will go back into it and start the slideshow again from the beginning. Okay, so you've seen the title slide, you have seen the questions, and these are the answers. As I just said, the Electoral College is a construct of a deliberately complicated system to elect the president. Obviously, talk more about that. These are just the takeaways. Number two, does the Electoral College reflect the popular vote in terms of the winner? Well, it does a pretty good job, but there have been exceptions. And third, are the prospects for reform, and what are they? The prospects for reform and elimination, and I'm not fudging on this, they are really hard to predict. Okay, now this cartoon. I'm a big fan of Schultz, and of course what we're seeing now are many replays of his cartoons because he unfortunately died. So this is a cartoon I like a lot for many reasons, but for tonight, the pertinent phrase is from Charlie Brown: "If I am elected, I promise." Now, some of you may think this is all a fairy tale, but it's pretty serious stuff. So the reason that I start with this is because for every country in the world and for all other public offices in the United States, the winner of an election, a candidate, or a party, in the case of a parliamentary system, that gets more votes than the opposition candidate or party wins the election. In the United States, as I'm going to show you in the next few slides, rather than directly voting for the president and the vice president, what we do, we citizens, we persons eligible to vote, cast votes for electors who are pledged to vote in the Electoral College for a specific president and vice president. Okay, so this is the way it works. Voters select electors on election day. And you can see here, some of them are Democrats and some of them are Republicans. And state legislatures, according to the Constitution, have the option of choosing the electors in any manner they see fit. And initially, most state legislatures did so themselves. However, with the rise of political parties by the beginning of the 19th century, all state legislatures have chosen to directly elect the electors by popular vote. So when you vote by absentee or early or on election day, you will see on your ballot that you are not voting directly for Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, or Donald Trump, Mike Pence. You are selecting electors who will vote for those candidates, not you directly. The next slide shows you how the states calculate the number of electoral votes or electoral seats that they have. And you can see here that in the case of a very small population state, Wyoming, Wyoming has only one representative, it has 2 senators, and it has a total of 3 electoral votes. And in contrast, California, the largest state by population in the nation, has 53 members of the House of Representatives, and so 53 electors plus 2 senators. All states have 2 senators, and so California has 55 electoral votes. Now, the number of electors totals 538. That is the 50 states plus 3 delegates from the District of Columbia. Next slide shows you the distribution of electoral votes by states. And here's California with 55, and here's Maine with 4, here's Montana with 3, and here's New York with 29. We have 29 members of the House of Representatives and 2 senators, 29. And you'll notice another state that has 29, and that's Florida. We're going to come back to Florida and the particular importance of Florida, but just be aware that Florida and New York in this election each have the same number of votes. Now this year, election day is November 3rd. Between November 3rd and the counting of mailed ballots to reach the final vote count in a state, let's say by November 6th, the state has 35 days until December 8th to appoint its electors, to appoint them. Now, these electors' names do not appear on your ballot. They are chosen by each party before the general election, before November 3rd. A vote for the winning party then confirms their position. If they happen to be Democrats and Democrats carry the state, it's a Democratic pledged set of electors. Now in 2016, you might be interested in knowing this, because I was curious, since I have never seen the name of an elector, who are these electors? Well, in 2016, for New York, they were composed of former President Bill Clinton, resident of New York State, the governor and the lieutenant governor, the comptroller, and the attorney general, and then Democratic leaders of the state Senate and the state Senate and Assembly, and 23 local representatives, including Lovely Warren, the mayor of Rochester, as of 2016. Now, I said 35 days between November 6th, when we know the final count for New York, and December 8th. December 8th guarantees that the Congress will have sufficient time to examine and accept their credentials by December 14th, when they're all going to meet in Washington to cast their votes for president. And this is a very important 35 days, because this is the time when challenges will be brought to totals in each state. Now, not every state is going to have a lot of challenges, but many states will this year. The president has already promised that this is going to happen. And they will be particularly focused this year on the validity of mailed ballots. Now, there's some hypothetical scenarios this year that could cause a constitutional crisis. Ask me about this if you are interested in the Q&A. The next slide shows you that on December 14th, when the electors meet in Washington, they ceremonially cast their ballots, and the votes are then counted as a joint session of Congress. There are all of the states, except for 2, practice winner take all. And I'm going to come back to that later with an example. But the point is that if one candidate gets more votes than the other for president, all of the votes in the Electoral College for New York go to that candidate. There are 2 exceptions. One is Maine, the other is Nebraska. And they're outlier states. They both give 2 at-large delegates or electors to whoever wins the state overall. And then they give 1 to the winner of each individual congressional district. You may have seen recently speculation about how votes in Maine for the president are going to go. And they say in the 2nd congressional district, they're going to go here. And in the 1st congressional district, they're going there. Well, that's because Maine has 4 Electoral College votes, and they don't cast them all for the winner statewide. Now, this next slide talks about some of the attributes of federalism, because I said it's a construct that came out of federalism, which itself was a construct in the Constitutional Convention. So here I've sketched out a continuum for you to look at, which shows the degree of national centralization of national power in a nation. There are 25 federal states in the world, not only the United States, but Canada and India, which has a much larger population than the United States, Brazil, Germany, Mexico. There are 25. The rest of the world is pretty much split, but largely falls on the unitary side, and we call a unitary system one with a high degree of national power vis-a-vis any sub-national units. France is a good example of that. Israel is a good example of that. Certainly the Russia is, and China is as well. Remember that in 1787, when the delegates to the 1787 Constitutional Convention met, they were there to reform the Articles of Confederation, because most of the power at that time resided in the states. Well, they emerged not with a reform of confederalism, they emerged with a total overthrow of the Articles of Confederation. And so I say here that a federal system is dynamic. There's constant tension on certain policy issues in terms of who really has the power and who does not, and it shifts from time to time. Now, this next slide is a more formal definition of federalism. But the point here is that the roles and the responsibilities in a federal system are the holders of power at the state level and the holders of power at the national government. But the important, very important point here is that each government, a state government and the national government, has its own unique, and I underlined, consequential areas. These are not trivial areas like who picks up the garbage. They are consequential areas of decision-making and authority. So in the case of the Electoral College, we have an instance of policy where both the states and the national government are very important. Their roles are stipulated in the Constitution. For example, states determine who can vote, when and where elections are held, and who appoints the electors. But the national government is hardly impotent here. And in fact, 3 important amendments to the Constitution considerably enhanced the national government's power over elections. And I think you're probably very well familiar with the 15th Amendment. This was part of a bundle of amendments after the Civil War, which abolished slavery, and more than that, gave citizens the right to vote, regardless of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. 19th Amendment, we all know about, gave women nationally the right to vote. And the 26th Amendment lowered the voting age across the board across all states to 18, largely down from 21. So these amendments enhanced national power vis-a-vis the Electoral College and generally with respect to elections, overrode power, overriding original powers of the states. So I got back to the question, the first question, why do we have such a complicated indirect system to elect the president? Well, this came out, as I have said, of the Electoral College. Now, I want to say before I talk about these attributes of the Electoral College, that the framers of the Constitution were not Democrats, small d. They were Republicans, small r. Small d Democrats advocated popular, direct participation in government. Small r Republicans advocated indirect participation through selected representatives. Now, regardless of whether one of those delegates or all of them were Democrats or Republicans, they all wanted a government that rested on popular consent. They didn't want to replicate the monarchy in England. They'd had enough trouble with King George. But the problem was, the complication was, they lacked faith in the judgment of the masses, and they were concerned about the tyranny of the majority. So how to accomplish this? They considered direct election of the president, but then they thought that's not very feasible because the country is so large, and believe me, it was much smaller then than it is now. And transportation and communication was relatively primitive. And furthermore, they were well aware of rivalries among the states and the regions that made a fair and honest election pretty problematic. So then they thought, well, maybe the Congress, popularly elected, should select the president. But then they couldn't agree on procedures that would ensure that the president, the elective, the appointed executive would be independent. And so they finally, because of the 3/5 compromise in the states, slaves were considered 3/5 of a person for purposes of representation in the Congress. And because a state's strength in the Electoral College is based mostly on its number of representatives in Congress, which we know now, they conceded because they didn't want the southern states to peel away from this. They wanted to have a consensus. So they conceded to the southern states that insisted on a system of electors that was going to increase their influence. Now, the Electoral College was a very thorny issue. It was the last issue, this compromise was the very last issue decided at the end of the convention. It was viewed as, and now you look at the slide, Republican form of government, consistent, efficient, politically acceptable, and furthermore, they felt it would likely result in the best outcome. So now we come to my second major question. How well has the Electoral College reflected the popular vote? Well, the answer is pretty well. In 90% of all the elections that we've had since 1788, the Electoral College has reflected the popular vote. However, there have been 5 exceptions. 3 of them in the 19th century and 2 of them in the 21st century. So a few words about these 3 in the 19th century. I must say I didn't really know very much about them. I found it very interesting. I hope you do too. Now, neither John Quincy Adams nor Andrew Jackson won a majority of Electoral College votes. They were split among other candidates. So the decision, consistent with the Constitution, fell to the House of Representatives, with each state casting 1 vote. Sort of tuck that away in your memory because this is an issue that is going to come up in a few minutes. Though John Quincy Adams had fewer electoral votes and fewer popular votes, he won the election. He was declared in the House of Representatives the victor. Historians speculate that Adams and Henry Clay, who came in 4th, he ran for president, but he was a Speaker of the House, cooked up a scheme. They colluded to influence the outcome. What did Adams want? He wanted to be president. What did Clay want? He knew that he wasn't going to get enough votes to become president. He wanted to become Secretary of State. So Adams agreed, and Clay, through his support and the votes he controlled, to Adams. This is the only time in our history that the House of Representatives has decided the outcome of a presidential election. In 1876, there was a dispute over 20 Electoral College votes, and it was resolved. The two opponents here were Samuel Tilden and Rutherford B. Hayes, and the solution was resolved outside of the Constitution by a committee composed of 5 senators, 5 members of the House, and 5 justices. And the result gave Rutherford B. Hayes the victor with fewer popular votes than his opponent. That is unique, that solution, that never has been tried since. And finally, just a word here, and this, I think in many ways is a harbinger that makes us think a little more deeply about the Electoral College. Republican Benjamin Harrison received a majority of Electoral College votes, even though his opponent, Grover Cleveland, received a majority of the popular votes. Who was elected? Harrison. You have to win 270 votes to be declared the victor in the Electoral College. So then we come to 2000, Bush v. Gore, 2016, Trump v. Hillary Clinton. And I want to show you now the difference, the mismatch, let's put it that way, between popular votes and Electoral College votes. You can see here that Gore nationwide received more than 500,000 more votes than Bush, yet he lost. He lost because of doubts of the accuracy of voting on November 8th, 2000 in Florida, and the fact that Florida's 25 electoral votes at that time was going to determine the winner of that election. I think most of you remember this. And so this may be a little replay for you. And for those of you who are too young to remember that, this may be news. Anyway, Bush, by election day, had won Florida by 537 votes out of about 6 million. So it's a pretty small margin. And so Gore insisted that under Florida law, there should be a manual recount of all the votes to get an accurate tabulation in 3 counties, all on the southeast coast of Florida: Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County. And the Florida Supreme Court agreed, and the count was underway. But before it was completed, George Bush, W. Bush, took the matter to the US Supreme Court, asking it to reverse the High Court in Florida. Now, what Bush argued was that the Florida Supreme Court had referred, in the case of examining all those manual ballots, to the, quote, intent of the voter. You remember those hanging chads where it wasn't clear really if that was meant to be punched or not to be punched. And the problem, Bush argued, or his lawyers argued, was that the intent of the voter wasn't clear because the Florida Supreme Court didn't set standards to establish when and why a vote could be counted. So the Supreme Court, a week later, on December, well, it wasn't a week later, it was on December 12th, 2000, decided that the process of recounting the vote should be stopped. The matter was settled, and George Bush was declared the President of the United States with 271 Electoral College votes. Now, I want to say that this brief summary does not really do justice to the dynamics within the Supreme Court or the high anxiety in the rest of the country awaiting the court's decision. And so I highly recommend to you, if you've got this book or if you can get it from the library, even buy it. It's a book by Jeffrey Toobin, and the title is The Nine. It's about the Supreme Court. And he spends several chapters talking about this, and really fascinating, really, really fascinating. Okay, so now we come to 2016, where Clinton won by popular vote by almost 3 million over Trump, and she lost in the Electoral College. So let me now show you some maps. And a couple things I would like you to observe. First of all, there's an awful lot of red here, right? These are the states that supported Bush. A lot of them. And typically, there's southern states, there are Midwestern states, and the coastal states and some Midwest states, blue. Gore in 2000 carried Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Keep that in mind when we look at the next one. The blue states are pretty much the same, but who carried Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin? Donald Trump. So we call these key battleground states, states that are not true blue or true predictably red. Trump's strategy was to hold on to the southern and the Midwestern states, typically Republican, and focus on these three battleground states that had favored Gore in 2000. So I think just looking at these maps shows you some interesting things. Anyway, you see that in 2016, Trump won 30 states. The Electoral College votes in 30 states. Clinton only, even though she got 3 million more popular votes, only got 21. And Bush got more states in 2000 as well than Gore. So let's see now. Okay, so let me just bring this up to date a little bit now that you understand 2000, 2016, that the major Electoral College battleground states, states that can shift for both the Biden and the Trump campaigns, have been very heavily visited by the candidates themselves. In fact, during the first 6 weeks of the official 2020 campaign through the first week in October, almost 75% of those in-person campaign visits, rallies, speeches, and on, were in just 6 states, closely divided battleground states. As this election gets closer and closer, the focus for each candidate is now narrowing even further to Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, no surprise, and Florida. Now, you might say, well, okay, we've got the same, we've got the same dynamics as in 2016 and in 2000, and in one of those elections, the last one that I pointed to in the 19th century. Is this so unusual? I mean, is this usual? Well, it is pretty usual. Narrow concentration of campaigning in person by presidential candidates in the swing states, it's not unique. In fact, Barack Obama used the same strategy, holding on to predictable blue states and accumulating enough more to accumulate Electoral College votes to win in 2008 and 2012. Okay, let me move to my last question, which is, what are some proposals for changing the Electoral College, the current system, and what are their prospects for adoption? So let's first look at the national level. Action at the national level. And I raise this question again. Why, 232 years after the Constitution was ratified, does the Electoral College remain in its original form in Article 2, Section 1 of our Constitution, unamended? Well, advocates for reform or elimination of the Electoral College in the Congress have offered many, many proposals over the years between 1800 and the present time. In fact, more than 800 times have amendments been proposed. They include national popular voting to replace the Electoral College, They include runoff elections to replace decisions by the House of Representatives, and they represent to more or less reflect the popular vote, proportional allocations by the states of their electors. A few proposed amendments to change the Electoral College have passed in one house or the other, but not one in both. Not one scaled the hurdles involved in amending the Constitution and was sent to the states for ratification. Now I'm going to quote, I think my favorite justice, and probably yours too, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who observed in a CNN interview in 2017, there's some things, she said, I would like to change. One is the Electoral College, but that would require a constitutional amendment, and amending our Constitution is powerfully hard to do. Since it was ratified in the late 18th century, the Constitution has been amended only 27 times. Now, the first 10 amendments were adopted altogether in the Bill of Rights in 1791. But in the intervening years, only 17 amendments have been added. And the ones affecting elections, I pointed out before, have predominantly dealt with voting rights, as well as providing for the direct election of US senators. That's in the 12th Amendment. And that was in 1804. Before then, the Constitution stipulated that they were to be elected by state legislatures, but now for a very long time, we elect them. So what is it about the Constitution? What are these hurdles? Well, changing the Constitution requires the separate approvals of 2/3 of the House of Representatives and 2/3 of the Senate, and then to the states for approval, for ratification by 3/4 of them. As Justice Ginsburg said, powerfully hard to do. So why such sustained resistance? Well, to amending the Constitution. Why the resistance? Now, conventional wisdom is that the small states are an effective roadblock because the Electoral College enhances their political influence by giving them more electoral votes because they each get 2 votes, more electoral votes per capita than large states. But evidence doesn't support that conventional wisdom. And as I'll show you later, members of Congress, for example, from small states have not voted on, as a block, on national popular vote proposals. They don't all oppose them. And I'm going to show you public opinion polls about that too. On the contrary, and I think this makes sense, the prevailing view of many politicians and many commentators is that it's the large states with the winner-take-all practice who are the primary beneficiaries of the Electoral College, and they don't support eliminating it. I found it interesting to look this up. I had a lot of fun doing this research, I will tell you that. I thank the League and the National Council for asking me to do this talk, because I love doing the research. Okay, in the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton won 59% of the total votes cast in New York State for president, about 4.6 million votes she got. And she received every one of the 29 Electoral College votes of New York. Donald Trump received, I think 41%, I guess that would be right, 41% of the votes cast in New York, or 2.8 million, and they were all disregarded. Winner take all means the winner takes all the Electoral College votes. Now, in a national popular vote, they would have been counted. The reality, I suggest to you, is that most states are ignored in presidential campaigns. Most states. I think if you remember the maps, they're not too different because they are reliably and predictably red, Republican, like Mississippi or North Dakota, or reliably and predictably blue, Democratic, like New York and California. They have been called flyover states. They're not states in play. I think the best explanation has to do with partisan politics. From the beginning of the Republic to the present time, politicians have long shifted their views to suit their preferred electoral outcomes, with the result that party interests have sometimes been consistent with reforming the Electoral College and sometimes not. For example, for more than 40 years, Electoral College reform has been more identified, more proposals introduced in Congress with the Democratic than the Republican Party. I suspect it's even stronger reforming the Electoral College since the elections of 2000 and particularly 2016. But that was not always the case, that the Democrats were ahead of the Republicans in advocating for national popular vote. So now let me move to one congressional law, action at the national level. We know that not only were Florida's processes and procedures flawed in the 2000 election, turns out that most every state has had flaws. And so the Help America Vote Act, passed in 2002, mandates improvements to voting systems that include replacing lever voting machines. Remember, that's all we used to use in New York, and punch card ballots with federal funds to carry out the costs of replacing those systems, and also instituting statewide voter registration database. Now, in that respect, the Help America Vote Act represents an important increase in federal power, again, as I pointed out with the amendments, over the states in the electoral process. However, don't come to the conclusion that the states have lost consequential power with respect to the Electoral College process. No, indeed. They still allocate electoral votes among candidates. They still regulate how candidates get on the ballot, and they stipulate where and how voting occurs. And state power was recently further strengthened by a Supreme Court decision just this summer, July 2020, that focused on so-called faithless electors. That is, electors pledged to a party candidate who don't cast their votes for him or for her. And in 2016, there were 5 such instances of faithless voters. 2 who pledged for Trump but didn't vote for him, and 5 who pledged for Clinton and didn't vote for her. What they did is they wrote in their own preferred candidates. Speaking for unanimous court in July, Justice Kagan, Elana Kagan, said, the state instructs its electors that they have no ground for reversing the vote of millions of its citizens. That direction accords with the Constitution, as well as with the trust of a nation that here we, the people, rule. In brief, the Supreme Court ruled that electors are not free agents. They must vote for the candidate whom the state's voters have chosen. So what about public opinion? This is from the Pew Organization survey in the summer of 2020. It's very current. Given the choice between a popular vote, constitutional amendment, 55% of those polled said amend the Constitution. 43% said keep the current system. Don't go for a popular vote. I think that's pretty straightforward. But I think this one is the interesting, really interesting slide. This shows, according to that same Pew survey this summer, that when given a choice of a national popular vote over retaining the Electoral College, partisan considerations come into play. I'll just demonstrate that here. Now, this is after 2000, but remember what happened in 2001 when support for the president was high, and so it was high, but among Democrats, he wasn't very popular. So 75% said, let's amend that Constitution. Let's get rid of this Electoral College and let the people's vote count. Well, it declined somewhat with the election of Barack Obama in 2008, 2012. But then look what happened after the election in 2016 of Donald Trump. Again, support for the popular vote. And it's a mirror opposite if you look here. Yeah. Lack of support for national popular vote when the Democrats took over. But then after the 2016 election, keep the Electoral College. That's what got our boy in. Okay, our man, I should say. Okay. So what do I think about this? I think that given the heightened partisanship in the 21st century, I call it hyperpartisanship, I think prospects for amending the Constitution to eliminate the Electoral College, they're not very promising. Okay, so now let me turn to the most publicized current proposal for reform known as the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. That is quite a mouthful. I'm just going to refer to it as the compact. And I need to say that the League of Women Voters of the United States, and therefore controlling all the local state and local chapters, supports the Interstate Compact. The National Council of Women, of Jewish Women, which Jane mentioned at the outset, has no position on the Electoral College. But look at this. This is so interesting. This compact was the brainchild after 2000 of a computer scientist and two law professors who each, the three of them separately, advanced the idea of bypassing the Congress and the Constitution by state laws that pledged that each state signing the contract would pledge its votes, all of its votes, to the winner of the national popular vote. But with this caveat, only if and only if states with 270 votes follow suit. Now, initially, this compact looked like a Rube Goldberg kind of contraption with just a very little chance of making much political headway. But to the surprise of skeptics, the pace of activity picked up in 2007, with Maryland, the first state to join the compact, after passage by both houses of the state legislature and the signature of the governor. That is critical for a state to join this compact. And here, as of the present day, 15 state legislatures plus the District of Columbia, accounting for 196 total Electoral College votes, had passed and their governors had signed the compact. And isn't this interesting? 3 small states, 8 medium states, 3 large states. That's why I was kind of skeptical of saying that small states were roadblocks to change, and then that the large states were roadblocks to change, because it isn't borne out by support and signing on to this compact. So if we were here in person, I could see your faces. I would ask you, what's missing? Who are missing here? So I'm sure you all know the answer. They happen to be southern states. They happen to be Midwest states. And so let's look for a moment at the positions of supporters and why, and the positions of opposers and why. Advocates for this compact focus on the virtues of a national election where every vote counts, and it would, and such a compact would eliminate the defects of the winner take all in states. The people who oppose, or the states that oppose, they argue that Electoral College isn't broken. Most of the time it does reflect the popular vote, so why fix it? It's worked well for 2 centuries, preserving federalism and protecting small and rural states. And they think that this interstate compact is a runaround of the Constitution, and an end run, I should have said, around the Constitution. And they think that in order for it to become controlling and law, it would have to pass the Congress. And they further think, and this I think is a really valid point, that it's undemocratic for a state to cast all of its electoral votes for a candidate who lacks majority support in that state. In other words, a state could sign on thinking, oh, well, the Democrat is going to win. It's going to win my state, it's going to win the national election. And lo and behold, the Republican wins. So this is morally unpalatable. Now I want to talk a minute about the League's position here. In the context, League of Women Voters, in the context of its consistent advocacy over 50 years, since 1970, in fact, for a national popular vote and abolition of the Electoral College. Now, 10 years ago, at its national convention in 2010, the League continued to strongly advocate for a direct popular vote for president, but then, recognizing the difficulties of amending the Constitution, the League endorsed the National Vote Compact, and I'm quoting now from official League language, as an acceptable transition to the goal of the direct popular vote. Despite the advocacy of the League, Common Cause, NAACP, and other organizations for this national compact, its prospects are uncertain. They are contingent on the relative strength of the Republican and the Democratic parties in national elections. And one scholar has written, if Democrats start to have a chance of carrying Georgia, Texas, and other once reliable red states, Republicans may then find the winner-take-all system less attractive. And they may favor a one-person, one-vote electoral system where every popular vote counts. Now, I'm approaching the end of this talk. You're probably all heaving a sigh of relief. But as I approach it, I'm wondering whether the question, does the Electoral College reflect the popular vote, is the appropriate one. It's certainly obvious in the 21st century that the pursuit of Electoral College votes drives the campaigns of presidential candidates. But maybe the better question is this one. Is the appropriate role of the Electoral College to reflect popular opinion, or is it to refine popular opinion? The founders who positioned the Electoral College, this institution in the late 18th century, as an intermediary between the people and the president, came down on the side, obviously, of refinement. In Alexander Hamilton's words, quote, "Election of the president should be made by a small number of men most likely to possess the information and discernment requisite to such complicated investigations." Now, ironically, the Electoral College, as I've mentioned before, in 49 of 54 presidential elections from the beginning, that's 90%, has actually ratified elections. What is the appropriate role in 2020? Now, normally forums like this feature balanced information and education on various topics. And in keeping with this spirit, I have not told you my own position on the Electoral College. If you're interested, I'll be glad to tell you in the Q&A. But my last words are to say that my goal in every college class I taught and in every community gathering like the one tonight, every one that I've ever given, is not to tell you what to think. In other words, I'm not pushing my own preference, but rather what to think about. I hope I have succeeded in that goal tonight. And I want to thank you for your attention and remind you to remember to vote. Thank you very much. Okay. Sure.
Hi. We're going to take questions now.
Gotta
If
get out.
anyone has questions.
Sure. Okay.
Does anyone have any
Oh,
questions?
I see a question here.
Okay.
And that question is, well, I planted this question. What is my position? Okay, well, I'll be glad to tell you what my position is. And I want to say that I recently had a lunch with a friend, and I told her I was going to give this talk on the Electoral College. And this is what she said. She said, "I don't know a darn thing about it, but I think it should be eliminated." So I said, "Well, I think that's a non sequitur." And so I'm not going to do that to you. I will tell you my bottom line, but I'm also going to tell you how my own position has changed. Okay, my bottom line is, yes, I do favor abolishment of the Electoral College. And I have several reasons for my evolution. Let me say that first, until 2000, except for only 3 times in the 19th century, which was so long ago, who even remembered, the Electoral College was essentially an institution that respected the importance of states in the national election process, and at the same time ratified, or even we could say legitimized, the outcome of the national popular vote, and I took it for granted. But then I began to consider whether this historic institution is appropriate for today. Americans in the 18th and 19th centuries tended to identify with the regions or states where they lived. Since the 20th century and into the 21st century, we by and large identify as Americans. That is with the nation, rather than the state we live in, or the region where we live. And that in part is because our economy, our national economy, is not region or state-based. It's very well developed. It's highly integrated. The events in Florida, which sort of were a wake-up call for me, revealed wide variation in types of ballots. Electronic machines, lever machines, punch cards, paper, but also in voter registration, ballot counting, election administration, not only in Florida, I made this point earlier, but across all states. We have not yet achieved a perfect universal voting system, but the Help America Vote Act of 2002 was a substantial national corrective of these diverse malfunctions of our democratic system. Now, unfortunately, American patriotism as measured by national polls has dropped sharply in the past 20 years. The latest polls Gallup announced on July 4th this summer show that, I'm quoting, record low American patriotism is the latest casualty of the sharply polarized political climate in the United States today. In fact, in that poll, only 45% of Americans indicate that they are extremely proud of the United States political system, way down from 70% in 2003. And in terms of the 8 aspects of the United States that Gallup polls on, Americans are most proud of American scientific achievements, followed by the military, culture, and arts, economics, sporting achievements, and diversity in race, ethnicity, and religion. Americans are least proud of the country's political system. Nonetheless, we vote in national presidential elections at much higher rates. And this year, I think, is going to be a very large turnout than for state or local elections. So despite this hyper-partisan divide we are experiencing, we remain proud. We are proud to be Americans, though certainly less than 20 years ago. And so I support amending the Constitution to provide for a national popular vote for president and thus to eliminate the Electoral College. Do you have any more questions?
Yes, yes. Could you talk about the change we'd see in how campaigns are run if we abolish the Electoral College?
Well, of course, by and large, they won't be flyover states. Certainly, the big states won't be flyover states because they're big population states. But it will be a matter of, if not pressing the flesh when the pandemic is over with voters, it will be a matter of trying to calculate where the best chances are for Republicans and Democrats, and concentrating on the states. Maybe there will be swing states, but the difference will be that all votes will be counted. So if you count up all the, let's say, the negatives for the Democrats in the red states and add them to, and add them to the majority votes in the blue states, you can fashion a victory. It's a matter of what the calculations are, about where the votes are, and you're probably not going to ignore any of them.
Okay, here's another question. How does the Supreme Court decision in the summer of 2020 regarding faithless electors impact the National Popular Vote Compact?
Just say that question again. Somebody's texting.
Okay, how does the Supreme Court decision regarding the faithless electors impact the National Popular Vote Compact?
Well, you wouldn't have electors. They're only electors of the Electoral College. They wouldn't exist anymore. The straight national popular vote, no intermediary electors. Okay. So you might have faithless Democrats who support Republicans, or faithless Republicans who support Democrats, but that's not the same thing at all.
Okay.
Has no effect.
There should be some more questions here, but they're disappearing off of my. Okay. This, we're going to take one more question.
Okay.
So So,
And it is?
how would you suggest reform? It's kind of
Well,
a broad question.
Okay, I thought maybe that would come up. I think that if the state interstate compact is successful, that should do what the national popular vote would do, and that is reflect it and elect a president. There'd be no intermediary that could refine, I'm using that word, refine the election.
Okay.
So I would go along, I have some problems with it, but I would defer to the league's judgment on this and support it. It seems so difficult. It is so difficult to amend the Constitution that it's an end run around the Constitution. It may be challenged. It may be challenged and found, unconstitutional. But I don't know. I don't think they're close enough to the 270 votes for that to figure right now.
Okay.
Good.
That was our last question. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Oh, let's see. So we are soon here going to thank you, Professor Liebschutz, for this wonderful presentation, and Elaine for the forum organizing and question moderating. Again, let me see here. Okay. Again, a link to the recording of tonight's forum will be sent in a few days and will be available on our YouTube channel, which can be accessed through the League's website. In closing, we urge everyone to be finalizing their voting plans, absentee, early, or election day. If you still have questions about those, please go to the Monroe County Board of Elections website and visit, let me see here, and visit vote411.org for more information on candidates. And thank yous all around to NCJW, Jane Amsty, and including their technical crew, Ricky and Lisa, and to Judy Weinstein for our League Zoom manager. This last slide here does show the contact information for NCJW and for the League of Women Voters. And on that note, since there were no more questions, this forum has come to an end, and good night to everyone.